Good afternoon, everyone. I am Audrey Haverkamp, ISPA's Head of Partnerships, and I'm delighted to welcome so many of you to our second webinar of our 2021 ISP Business Model Series dedicated today to how to deliver Gigabit Britain. So before we start, I just would like to thank Steve Layton, one of our ISPA Council members and CEO of Voneus, who chaired today's event. Also, all our speakers and our annual ISPA partners for making this event possible. Just a few reminders about Hopin, this platform divided into 4 areas. This is the stage where we are and where all the presentation will be broadcasted. Please keep this tab open. If you want to check the other areas, please open new tabs. The reception is where you can find the event agenda and the speakers list. The networking area is where we will have the break at 2:55 and where you can be matched with a random attendee. And the expo area is where our partners' stands are displayed. So please feel free to visit them and register. Click the register interest button if you want special offers for ISPA members. For your questions during the presentations, please use the stage chat and not the event chat. And still we pick up your questions at the end for the Q&A sessions after each presentation. So without further ado, I'm very pleased to welcome Steve to give the opening remarks, and I wish you all a very good event.
Thanks, Audrey. Thanks for the introduction and for the invitation to chair the event. And good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. As Audrey said, my name's Steve Layton and I'm the CEO of Voneus, a company that specialises in delivering broadband services to rural and semi-rural locations across the UK. I'm also, as Audrey said, on the board of ISPA, and it's a real pleasure to be invited to chair this event today on the challenges we face as an industry in building Gigabit Britain. We've got some great speakers and panellists joining us today. I'll come on to formal introductions with those guys later as we go through the agenda. Before I do that, however, I thought it might be useful to do a little bit of scene setting and give you a feel for where I believe we are in respect of building Gigabit Britain currently. From the UK perspective, we don't really need to look any further than the noises coming from our own government to understand the importance of gigabit-capable connectivity to all of us. There have been some very bold statements and headline-grabbing timelines thrown out there by ministers and senior officials. And although the language has changed slightly from the promise of a full fibre UK to the promise of a gigabit-capable UK, opening the door, obviously, for the potential deployment of alternative solutions to full fibre, despite that subtle change, the core message remains the same. If the UK is to remain competitive, it needs to be a fully gigabit-capable nation. We're all aligned on that. And everyone attending this event today will know that actually, although we're all aligned on that, we're a long way from achieving that right now. Whichever data source you use, the figures do paint a pretty consistent picture about where we are. The UK's got a little under 30 million homes based on the data set I looked at, and currently less than 20% of those homes have access to a fully gigabit capable connection. So that means we're a long way down the global connectivity league table, and there's a lot for us to do as an industry to get us to move up that table. And that, of course, is where we, the industry, come in. Although government is playing its part with financial incentives in some areas, I would argue they could probably do more to facilitate build through deregulation and expediency, particularly in areas such as planning and way leaves, etc. But ultimately, however, it's going to be down to us, the industry, the guys on this call, to build out the world-class infrastructure that we need and that's required to meet these connectivity coverage aims. And there, in one sentence, is our challenge. Okay. We all have a role to play in that, and that gives us a common purpose. We all actually want the same thing. Yes, there will be occasions where we compete, but ultimately, if we're going to achieve nationwide gigabit-capable connectivity in an aggressive timeline, we're also going to have to learn to collaborate. All of our speakers and panelists today are part of the broadband ecosystem that will help the UK deliver on its ambitions. So whether you're involved in financing network build, network planning and design, network construction, service provision, customer acquisition, or even product and technology development, there will be some key messages and lessons for you to take out of this event today. I'm actually really looking forward to it. I've not heard any of the speeches myself. So here's to a very successful event. On that note, I'd like to introduce our first 3 panelists and to introduce our first panel. We've got Amy Wettenhall joining us from the Macquarie Group. Amy will introduce herself in a second. She's going to be joined on this first panel by Rob Tristram from City Fibre and by Piotr Golubski from Fibrain. So without further ado, Amy, can I hand over to you to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about Macquarie in this space?
Sure, thanks, Steve. And well, I can't actually see you all, but it's great to see so many participants on this call. It's a really valuable discussion that I hope we're going to have in the next half an hour. As Steve said, I am at Macquarie Group. My role there is I focus on our network's asset financing. So in that role, I look across the broad spectrum of the network and indeed peripherals that hang off the network, fixed and wireless. Within the asset financing space, I typically focus on assets with a lifespan of 15 years or less, and they're typically dispersed in nature, which means that's hugely applicable, obviously, for this conversation. So that's my main focus, and I'm sure I'll talk a little bit about our lens on this topic in a minute.
Great. Rob, could you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, everyone, and thanks, Steve. Thanks for having me. And it's, again, to echo Amy's comments, it's great to have so many people attending this event. So I work for City Fibre, and I'm the head of network optimization. And the core of what my team and department does is to maximize the number of customers we can bring onto the network. Some of the key functions we play within the business includes MDU design and build, which is a challenging area, as a lot of us will know. Also small works and infill, picking up those pockets of network that can't be built first time around. I also have a function which takes care of data analytics to maximize the integrity of our data with a customer focus.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Rob. Piyush?
Sorry, I was muted. Yes. Yeah. So thank you very much, Steve, for welcome. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really happy to be here. I can only regret that we can still meet in person. I hope that soon we get back to normal life. My name is Piotr Golubski. I'm Business Development Director at Fibrain. Over the last 22 years, I had different operational positions at Orange. Then I gained a different angle experience. I mean, the supplier perspective from working for Ericsson and Juniper Networks. And the last 8 years working for Fibrain, who is a supplier and manufacturer of fiber optic products and solutions. So I would like to to explain a little bit more about our perspective as a manufacturer, how we can meet customer, both, operators and manufacturers, to meet customer requests for speed, for more bandwidth, and future-proof networks and services.
Fantastic. Thanks, Piyush. So the purpose of this first panel, guys, the title of the panel was Overcoming the Latest Technological, Financial and Operational Challenges to Deliver the Next Generation Networks in the UK. Rob, can we start with you? Because City Fibre's got a very aggressive build plan going on right now. Where do you see the fundamental challenges when it comes to building out large-scale networks? Is it a resource issue? Is it a financing issue? Is it a combination of all of those?
I think for us, we're in a unique position where we're very well financed, like a lot of people on the call. And we know there's a lot of big funds in the world that are looking to invest in this kind of technology, this kind of network. But there are a lot of challenges. I think as a country and as an industry together, we all face the challenge of resource. Do we have enough people to be able to do the roles that we need them to at scale? We're going to do this from scratch. And it's one of the big advantages of building a new network. We can do it from absolute scratch, which means we can build the data from scratch as well. But for us, the same challenges apply to everyone. If you're overbuilding a network, if you're building something new, if you're just upgrading something, it's resource. We then also touched briefly upon wayleaves as well. It's a big challenge in the industry, especially when you get into MDU dense cities. And I know a lot of consultation has been going on, and a lot of you will have been involved with that with DCMS. But again, it's another big challenge for us, because not only do we have to build the network at the right time, we also have to bring the customers on the journey as well. And for people who are in a freehold or a leasehold set up in a multi-dwelling unit, that can be a challenge to actually connect them and get that last hurdle. So as much as we can dig in the streets, we've got to get into the houses and the buildings as well. So that's probably some of the fundamental challenges that we face as a business.
Sorry, I have to go on mute because I think I might be the source of the echo. Thanks, Rob. That's a good start. And Amy, if I could just turn to you. You know, Rob mentioned the fact there that he's a well-financed business, so he's a lucky guy in that respect. I think from your seat in Macquarie, you've got some different, innovative and creative financing solutions for those looking to build out large-scale networks. Perhaps you could give us a couple of examples of how those might work in this space.
Yeah, sure. And look, I totally agree with Rob. I think we're all aware this is a pretty well-funded area. There's no shortage of those long-term investment funds deploying their capital. But I think the way we look at it is that the problem is one of an entire ecosystem and one of benefits realisation. So the fibre in the ground is one thing. Actually, deploying Gigabit Britain in all its senses is realising the benefits. Be that top line, be that operational efficiency, be that GDP growth, ultimately that the infrastructure and the peripherals give. And increasingly what I see is that the customer base, which is much broader than it used to be, of course, is really looking to the ISP community to come up with more innovative solutions in terms of how the deployment can work. I think we see a need to, as experts, certainly having industry expertise in the financial sector is important. I think having financial expertise in the industry is equally important. And focusing on financial products that recognise the need to sell solutions, rather than just individual products. And I think, Steve, you got the nail on the head when you said collaboration. I don't think we'll achieve the ambition without that cross-industry collaboration across the board. And there's probably a few elements to that. We've got this huge legacy takeout happening in parallel. We shouldn't ignore that. There's very valuable legacy asset base out there that can be easily wrapped into business cases, ultimately looking through the lens of what's the customer business case, what do they need to deliver to their customers, and how can we make that more beneficial to speed up that rollout. I think including peripherals in the conversation is important. That 30% of homes you talked to there, Steve, I'd hasten to bet that a lot of those homes, even with fibre, will still have a challenge, whether it's CPE, whether it's devices, whether it's any number of different peripheral factors. And I think also understanding that the reality is, as we move to supplier diversification and away from those large monolithic turnkey suppliers, there will be a working capital implication that all organisations across the board have. And so some of the products that we're seeing becoming more relevant are, how can smart capital inject capital in a way that is in harmony with the deployment needs, but also the returns at the other end. There's a long time between implementation and cost benefit realisation, and financial smart capital solutions can support that. And I think we can also, as an industry, get a little too fixated at times on the cost of financing. Of course, money has a cost, but ultimately we need to support our financial functions, looking at the overall business case, and injecting some financing throughout that project life cycle when you've got use cases that are coming down the line, and often iteratively, because the business change is extreme and it does take time, can really help there. So we're seeing an increased ask to look at staged iterative solutions. They might be phasing that Capex, they might be Opex based in their nature. They certainly require the inclusion of software and services in addition to the hard infrastructure that we're talking about. So those are the types of areas that we focus on. There's obviously many different solutions here, but I do think that disrupting the business models and collaborating in terms of what the end customer benefit is going to be driven by, and bundling those solutions is something very relevant to speeding up here.
Brilliant, Amy. Thanks. I'll probably come back to you later about infrastructure funds expectations on returns, and what classifies a long, short, medium-term return on an investment in this space. But before we get into that debate, Piyush, clearly you've been sitting there very patiently and quietly for the last 10 minutes listening to these two guys talk about how they finance and how they build, but neither of them will be able to finance or build without the equipment that you guys develop and provide. Can you talk to us a bit about supply chain challenges currently? Do you see any? Are there any on the horizon? We've got an awful lot to do in the UK, 20 odd million homes to gigabit capable in the next 3 to 4 years. How is the supply chain geared up to meet that requirement?
I think that many of us, many operators still may remember the fiber shortage from a few years ago, where the worldwide demand for fiber exceeded the production capacity of fiber manufacturers. Nowadays, the shortages in semiconductors and other components is the fact. So it's impacting not only networking equipment, but also consumer electronics. When it comes to fiber optic cables and fiber optic components, the current lead time is, can say, fairly stable, despite of disruption in supply chain. But it's getting longer due to increasing worldwide demand and worsening situation in availability of raw materials. We as a manufacturer, since the very beginning of our production, we diversify our supply source. That's a well-known business strategy that ensures a diverse supplier base in procurement of materials for production. Moreover, we used our best endeavor to maintain sufficient stock of raw materials to meet customer expectation for the product volume and lead time. So therefore, I think that the importance of accurate and reliable customer focus is becoming increasingly important. We always happy. I think each manufacturer, each supplier is always happy if customer increase the volume, even if not forecasted. But the good forecast is an essential part of the business and main purpose to provide efficient service, especially now. I was not sure if there was a question, your question, because your voice was.
That's fine. You've answered the question perfectly.
Yeah. Okay, I'll try to.
Rob, can I come back to you? You provided some slides in advance of the session. Do you want to pop those up and talk us through some of the key metrics that you're seeing from a City Fibre perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. And just while these are loading up, I can say the materials are so important, as we know, especially when you tie in with the finance piece. We're building networks, collaboratively, all of us, that have to last a generation, and the platforms behind those have to last as well. So it's so important in terms of what we're building there. And I think there's a really healthy bit of push and pull between the material suppliers and the ISPs and the infrastructure providers as well, where we're pushing new technology on the boundaries on all fronts. So that's a really, really healthy thing for us. So I've got some slides here just with some of the key metrics for City Fibre, which I just want to talk about very briefly, just a couple of minutes. And then if there's any questions off the back of this, I'd be happy to answer them. So as I said at the start, we've got an 8 million home commitment by 2025. And the map here on the left-hand side, which you can see, is showing our rollout plan. And as I alluded to, that it's got to be the right 8 million. There is inevitably going to be overbuild. There is going to be competition, but both of those things are healthy for the consumer and for the country. And so for City Fibre, this is a 4 billion rollouts investment program, and that's across 285 locations. So that's cities, towns, villages, and we are constantly pushing the boundaries of that and looking to expand the footprints. This will be an ongoing thing for us. And that's 59 areas that we currently have in build at the moment. So it's a really, really great scale that we're moving at, and it is the right scale as well. And what I will say is we haven't slowed down. We are still on track for that 2025, despite the challenges of COVID. And with that, we're now live in 38 different areas, which is a really good news story for us. As I move on to the next slide, this just shows our ISP picture. And it wasn't that long ago that we only had Vodafone as our core FTTH anchor. And we've now expanded that, and you can see their names on the screen, but a really great series of partners there. And some of these partners have been with us as both business ISPs and moving into FTTH as well, and with us for many, many years. So it's a sign of the trust they have in the business, which is really assuring actually for all of us that are involved and committed to this and passionate about it. And then I won't talk through these scores. Instead, what I will talk through is what underpins these scores. And we're very proud of everything that's on the screen there. And for us, this has been a context of scale again. We have scaled from 2018 with our first FTTH city through to where we are now. And although I can't talk about exact numbers, it's a big rollout across those 38 locations. And those scores have stayed steady. And in some cases, they're actually going down in terms of fault rate, which is absolutely fantastic. And for us, again, it's not just about building fibre, it's about building a platform. And with that goes the systems, the services, and the products that underpin it all. And what that really makes is a new network experience. And we are focusing so heavily on the data integrity and availability to make it easy to integrate with CityFibre. And that's what we're really trying to make here, a platform that is easy to integrate. So ISPs and businesses can grow their businesses using CityFibre. They have a level of control which will be industry leading, and there'll be a quality here which is industry leading. So that is really our head mark, and that's our mantra that we want to go towards. And really underpinning in all the investment we're doing in data and analytics and in the people as well. So a lot of good things going on. And if there's any questions that come through just from what you've seen on the screen very briefly, I'll be more than happy to answer them.
Thanks, Rob. Looking at the stage chat now, there don't appear to be any questions coming through just yet, but I've got a couple that I'd like to put at Amy. A lot of infrastructure funds around Amy, as you said, sticking lots of money into this sector. It appeared to me a couple of years ago that on every street corner there was a man with a van and a fibre plan, all looking for huge amounts of cash to build tons of fibre to respond to the government's rallying call to try and get the UK up that Gigabit connectivity league table. But at some point, these funds are going to start looking for returns. Okay, what's a typical return timeline for a significant investment in something like a fibre infrastructure play? And alongside that, do you envisage any kind of consolidation amongst these man with a van and a fibre plan models at some point? Do we believe there'll be some consolidation in this space across the UK market at some point shortly? I'd love to hear your views.
Yeah. So on the long-term returns question, I think, look, ultimately, and unhelpfully, in terms of answering the question, it very much depends on what you're looking at in terms of yeah, stay on mute. What you're looking at in terms of coverage, in terms of urban versus rural. There's very different business models. I think what I would say though is what we're seeing from those long-term investors is an increasing pressure on their customers and on their investments to speed up those returns, in any way that they can. That's clearly, what they're in their long-term game for. And that's really where we as shorter-term debt funders come in. They are looking to us to support you guys in the market with those new and innovative business models, such that you're starting to see those revenue forecasts coming in earlier. You're starting to see the adoptions take up quicker in terms of new services and new products being released. And ultimately, the reality is of where balance sheets are and where capital budgets are, without having a mixture of that long-term investment and shorter-term debt facilities available, particularly with investors such as Macquarie. We're experts in assets and therefore able to work with customers to look at solutions, incorporating a level of technology and asset risk, which is important in terms of the cost of money. They're looking to us to implement those solutions with the market more broadly. So I think I'd categorise it without giving an exact timeline, but by saying there is this increasing pressure, and certainly we're seeing that with the customers we work with, that their stakeholders are looking to them to speed up, and debt financing is certainly a kind of key element of that. Your second question was about consolidation. I think it'll be a balance. Look, clearly we're seeing globally markets take a different approach to this. They have different regulatory challenges and different regulatory landscapes, which obviously play a big part. Look, I think we will see an element of consolidation, but I think we're also at an interesting, apex point in the UK where we do value diversification. We do value the competitive nature of our technology landscape. And there is also, as you talked about, Steve, not a reason why a number of players in the ecosystem can't exist in harmony and collaborate to ultimately achieve the end goal. So I think we'll see some of that, but it shouldn't really detract our focus from the end game, which is getting to that gigabit, excuse me, Britain as quickly as possible.
Rob, we've had a couple of questions come through on the stage chat for you. Your RFS rate is impressive at 97%. To what do you attribute that? Where's the secret of your success? Is there any secret sauce in there?
I think for us, part of it is just the joy of being able to build a brand new network. And as I was talking about earlier on, everything going in the ground is bespoke for City Fibre. Some great manufacturing base as well, and really solid partners in that space. And then a lot of due diligence throughout the construction process as well, a lot of assurance going into that. So by the time it does get towards being exposed to a customer, everything is exactly where it should be, and we have the data completely aligned. We also have invested a lot in the personnel that run our customer services, and we actually now have a whole customer division within the company, which purely focus on the ISPs and the end users as well, to make sure that both get a really fantastic experience. And part of that is also making sure the experience in the dwelling of the end user is really world class. And that's a short-term SLA, a really good experience of the installation, and then also a really timely service. So there's lots of things that make up that number, and we are really proud of it, but we don't want to rest on our laurels. You know, if you let standards slip, that can go lower very quickly. So we're constantly reviewing what else we can do in that space, and we'll keep doing so.
Thanks, Rob. And a couple of follow-on questions also for you, I'm afraid. One is, what's the approximate percentage of small works and MDU against the premises in your locations? And secondly, do you use a lot of PIA at City Fibre, and is that affecting install rates and reliability, etc.?
So in terms of percentages, I can't really give specifics nationally, but we've got it broken down at city level. What we can say is certain cities in the north and Scotland have a far higher percentage of MDUs, and most people know that. So we work that into our business models and our long-range business plans to make sure that's accounted for. We also have to work it into our penetration rates as well, to make sure our investment is fully understood. In terms of the small works and the infills, it is quite sporadic, and it's very dependent on things like Section 38s and 58s, all of which we have in designs. But what we have to do is make sure that when City Fibre is rolling through a city, we don't leave anyone behind. And it's a hard journey sometimes. If someone is down a street that's under a restriction for whatever reason, we have to get back to them with a separate communications package to say, we will be back, but we can't get you first time for whatever reason it may be. And that is tricky, and I'm not going to say we have that completely nailed down yet, and we're still working to refine it, but it's a journey that we're definitely on. And in terms of PIA, we do use it. It is obviously challenging, and a lot of people will know that it's difficult to manage sometimes. You're using someone else's system in a portal, but it's a good thing for the business. It avoids intensive overbuild, it saves cost, and it allows us to move at a faster pace, and also to invest more as well. So it just means we can pass more homes. So it is a yes, but I think most people know it is challenging. But again, we are very aware of that, and we have specific teams and personnel who take care of that function for us within City Fibre.
We've got a session on PIA and a case study following this panel. That'll give us a bit more insight into that. Another question, Rob, and you seem to be Mr. Popular today because this one's aimed at you as well. So do you drive the product mix of your partner ISPs, or is it purely a wholesale model where the sales uptick is transparent to City Fibre?
It's pretty transparent, to be honest. We have a huge business sector. We'll be known for a lot of PSM works as well. But yeah, very, very transparent and open. We want to be open, an open network, and drive it for the right metrics, and make it a good experience for the people that are coming on board. So obviously a lot of conversations have happened over these last 2 years, going from 1 to the 18 that we saw before, and many, many more in the future. It's obviously a big transformational time for us.
And a final question for you, Piyush, before we move on to the next section. We know what technology is available to us now, and of course most of us use these technologies building the networks we're building now. What's around the corner? Is there anything emerging that's going to allow us to build quicker or do more with less?
Okay, so I'm unmuted right now. So yes, so there is a lot of actually. So because over the last 50 months, so during the pandemic and during the many lockdowns, so that was a big stress test ever for the network. So the operators started to do, and not only operators, but the manufacturers started to reconsider what technology, if the technology is using right now is a bottleneck or not. So the stress test has shown, I mean, the last 50 months showed that despite the increased bandwidth consumption in the recent time, The optical distribution network and the technology on top of that are not the bottleneck in the access to the internet, to the network. But it doesn't mean that fiber optic operators can sleep peacefully. Not only bandwidth is important, the subscriber pays more attention to delays, to packet loss when, for example, uses video conferences or VPN connections or more symmetrical bandwidth. So therefore, many operators, as already said, have been reconsidering the technology being deployed. And how far these products are and solutions are future-proof. I'm not just talking about only about the active equipment, but fiber optic cables and all passive components too. There are plenty technologies, solutions, and standards available to consider to make network future-proof. But the most important are those that guarantee full interoperability. That means the solution is based on the standards. The second is the full band support in optical distribution network. So full band means the full spectrum from 2060 to 6050 nanometers. And of course, the planning and the quality of the network. So the considering power budget margin for future PON system. So by keeping this recommendation in mind, operators and we as manufacturers can make sure that the networks will be ready in the future for seamless transition or upgrade when they decide to what evolution path to take. ODN and technology should not be bottlenecked to meet customer speed expectation. Of course, we should not forget the subscriber home network, where customer premises equipment, especially Wi-Fi module, may limit the customer speed demand. So the new standards, for example, Wi-Fi 6 or mesh network. So that's a kind of standard that definitely will help to achieve the better customer experience and to offer more bandwidth to the customer. But optical distribution networks, when it comes to the fiber and itself, so there is of course different type of the fibers, but we should remember and we should focus on those three important things: that interoperability, that network should be full band support for the future-proof optical distribution networks like XGS PON, next generation WDM PON, and the other systems. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Piyush. We're a couple of minutes over, but there's some quite interesting chat coming through the stage chat box now about the definition or identification of broadband as a utility. Now, anyone who follows me on LinkedIn will know that I've been banging this particular drum for some time and always call broadband the fourth utility. The comments in the chat room are in the context of local authorities and housing associations being forced to define it as a fourth utility to accelerate the Weilu process. Now, they're preaching to the converted in respect of me, because I'm a great believer in that. I'd welcome the views of other members of the panel on that. Should broadband be identified and categorized as the fourth utility because it's now essential service, right?
I mean, from my perspective, absolutely, I agree with you. I also think that Anna and Daniel in those posts there touch on an important point in terms of those divisions in society. So, so with that social housing and local authority owned properties comes the second issue, which is, even if Rob gets in there with the fibre, by definition, a large percentage of the population there won't have access to the peripherals such that they can increase the productivity of that local area, of that place that the local authority is looking to solve. And I think that's definitely where providers that are focusing on those type of areas or on more rural areas where the business cases are tighter in terms of revenue returns and indeed what customers' price points are, what they're able to pay. We do need to have a more broader conversation, I think, around any types of subsidies on those tariffs, bundling devices in, providing end-to-end solutions such that there is proper take up, but actually that correlates to productivity increase, education, whatever the case may be in those areas. And increasingly with COVID, that's become, very much a highlighted issue, and certainly something that we spend a bit of time working on with the local authorities in those type of areas.
Yeah. Thanks, Amy. Rob, any comment from City Fibre on that?
Yeah, absolutely agree with everything that's been said in the chat and what Amy's just said as well. It's such a challenge, and I believe the only reason it's not classed as a utility is when that phrase or concept was defined, our industry just didn't exist in the way it does now. And the way we interact with the world has changed dramatically. And it is very frustrating, and the term we use in City Fibre is digital divide. And it's frustrating for residents when you have a world-class network outside, sometimes several world-class networks outside, but you can't get to it. I think we increasingly see indecision around the Weilu space, and also it's a known thing within our industry, people leveraging the asset of Weilu for financial gain as well, for better or for worse. But what we really need to put at the heart of this is the customer and the end users, to give them the opportunity to connect. And actually, it will power all of our businesses and make us faster if we can make that cleaner and better. In terms of return of revenue, the more customers, the more we can build, and that's just the most simple level for all of us. So unsticking Weilu for the industry will really help. And I know there's been lots of positive progress with DCMS. I think we're all aware that the government's eyes have been elsewhere over the last few years, and that's understandable. But now is the time, and post-COVID, with the amount of reliance we've all had on it, all of us included as well, working at home, this is the time to do it now, and we have to unite on that front, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. Piyush, unfortunately, I haven't got time to come to you on this comment, but I will say that if you're following the chat, Andrew Glover is in there, who's chairman of ISPA, so one of my fellow board members on ISPA, and he raised this issue with DCMS Minister Matt Warman last week. I've actually got a call with Matt Warman next Wednesday, and it'll be top of my list to raise with him as well. It's certainly a key issue. As Andrew says in the chat, nothing concrete in legislation yet, but we'll keep banging on that drum until we get something cemented. Just reminds me to thank you guys for your time. I hope you're going to stay around for the networking in 15, 20 minutes, or whatever the time is, 25 minutes from now, because there may well be some more questions coming through, and you'll have the opportunity to network with the audience and address their concerns and issues and additional questions. But thanks to the three of you. I'd like to ask you to step away from the stage now so that we can hand over to our next panelists, our next presentations. Thanks again.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks all.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so I'm just waiting to see if our next speakers are ready in the backstage. I'm waiting for a prompt from the ISPA team. The next session is on lessons learned from PIA, and we've got speakers from Openreach and from GigaClear joining us. And there is Mark Logan, who is the product director at Openreach with responsibility for PIA rollout. And we should be joined by Catherine Warren, who's Director of Transformation and Innovation at GigaClear. There we are. So can I hand over to you, Mark, to kick this session off?
Yeah, sure, Steve. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah, I think Catherine's got a lot of background noise, so there we go. She's gone on to mute.
Okay,
That's fine.
good. All right, brilliant. Lovely to be here. As I say, I'm Mark Logan from Openreach. I'm responsible for Openreach's product portfolio. I guess I'm here to talk about PIA, which is something we don't usually get into the newspapers about quite as much as we do on our own fibre rollout. So, where like City Fibre and a lot of you here, GigaClear with Catherine and co, all busy rolling out FTTP. And, we have set out our ambitions as well for that service. But the thing we've been investing in massively over the last, almost a decade, actually. I was just going to share my screen, if that's okay, Steve, just to pop up a slide which people can
please do, Mark. That would be useful.
Perhaps have a look at while I'm chatting. Is PIA? It's coming up to its 10th anniversary. We sort of started it towards the end of 2012, and there were a few hardy customers out there at the time building. Actually, I think it was VDSL networks, frankly, and a little bit of FTTP networks back in 2012 and the early parts of 2013. And the whole service was run by about 6 people out of a telephone exchange in Walsall. And everything was done by email and spreadsheets and the like. And there it sat for quite a while until really Ofcom decided that they really wanted to try and get a bomb under Gigabit Britain. And they certainly saw the reuse of certainly Openreach's duct and poles, and there was lots of other DCMS activity about using anybody's duct infrastructure. Wanted to, in 2018, they sort of changed the rules of the game, and Openreach since 2018 has invested a hell of a lot of time, people, energy and money into PIA, and you can sort of see the trajectory. Actually, I think this slide's sort of slightly out of date. We're now over 130 CPs that have been enabled for PIA, and you can just sort of look at the bottom bit of the slide there, the sort of ramp. You know, we had sort of 47 in November 2019, we had 67 a few months later, then 93, and then 124 in April, and as I sat here in June, we're past 130. So that's 130 CPs out there. It is fairly true, I think, Steve. Some of them are sort of Fiberman and Avan or whatever you described it as, but you know, there are all of the big brand names that you would assume with fiber building are using PIA to some extent. So it's been a massive sea change and take up of PIA, and you can sort of see some of the stats that we're happy to share at the bottom. A notice of intent is basically and think of it as an order where a CP says, I want to use this piece of duct, or this, I want to build in this area. They basically tell us they're going to work in a particular area. You know, we're up to 32,800 notice of intent in April, and then we've got 29,000 kilometres of duct under basically under build, as the CPs have told us they're going to build, and about 230,000 poles. So it's become a sort of fairly massive project and growing at an exponential rate. And you look at what Openreach have been doing is we've been putting some significant investment into our IT infrastructure to try and connect us electronically with all of the network builders out there, so they can kind of do their designs on their in-house systems, and you know, get their planners walking around with iPads and things out in the field and pressing buttons and putting orders into us and requesting changes or us to swap poles out. So we're sort of probably in the foothills of the automation journey with PIA. But I think the big thing I wanted to say, you know, Openreach is a sort of physically large organisation. You know, we've probably got about 30,000 people in it, and about 29,000 out of that 30,000 people are engineers who go out in the network and fiddle about with stuff. And those 29,000 people, some of them have been working for Openreach for 50 years, and they've never had to think about somebody else having stuff in our ducts, or strange boxes appearing on poles, or you know, different labelled cable, or gangs operating in patches and areas that the teams didn't know anything about. So it's a massive learning exercise for Openreach and its people to learn to live with you know, other people in and out of our network, and doing stuff in our network, and doing stuff differently to the way we do stuff, which, you know, causes, you know, engineers to raise concerns and issues. So it's been not only has it been a sort of massive learning curve about how we want to work with the PIA CPs, and what's the best way of automating things, and how do we make things simpler. So we've been on a massive journey from 2018, but just culturally, and for our engineering teams who deal day to day in the network, getting used to sharing everything is a big thing. And I would say as well, as much as Openreach is learning, I think out of our sort of 130 PIA CPs, they're all learning. You know, all the CPs have got different methods of work, different designs, and they're wondering how to best use the Openreach ducts, poles, joint boxes and the like, and it's a learning exercise for us all, trying to figure out how we sort of share stuff together. Not many of our CPs have been building overhead networks. Most people traditionally have, certainly outside of Openreach, have been building networks using ducts and underground. So learning to how you design and build an overhead network and how you best connect that with your underground network has been a learning experience for everyone. So I would say we're at sort of very exciting times up here. We're massively committed to making the service work. We have umpteen industry meetings and forums. I know some people get bored as heck with all those things, but we see them as being very important. We've got regularly quarterly meetings with Ofcom and their CEO and many of the very senior stakeholders out in the PIA land, because Ofcom are desperate to make sure PIA works, and we're all learning basically. So I think that's probably what I wanted to say. I think, Steve. That's all right.
Thanks, Mark. That's useful. There'll be some questions coming in, I'm sure. But in the meantime, let's hear from Catherine, who I believe is an advocate of PIA and uses it regularly at Gigabit. So,
yeah, thank you very much, Steve, and thank you, Mark, as well. So, yeah, I it's sort of my fault, and I'm afraid that we're talking about PIA today, because I was my sort of long title is Director of Transformation and Innovation. So I was asked to kind of talk about, what innovations are you looking at to drive Gigabit Britain? And I was talking to Audrey, and for me, fundamentally, although we think about innovation as technology, that's kind of what we tend to do. And I get a lot of people who will email me about AI and this tool and this system. But what is fundamentally, really led to a transformation in our industry is the opportunity of PIA. I was, an early supporter of it in GigaClear, and we very much started using it in small scale, kind of getting over, under, and through obstacles, special engineering difficulties. And what I've been doing over the last few months has been really looking at how we can, use that to our best advantage in terms of reaching rural communities. And, as Mark says, it's a journey. We're learning as we go. It is complicated. It is always complicated, this kind of infrastructure sharing. How do you communicate when you've got armies of people going out there, as as Mark was saying, going out there and working on the network, and then we've got slightly smaller armies going out working on the network. How do we ensure that we're doing it in a way that is cohesive and that it is it's going to deliver the benefits that we want, and it's also going to be something that is sustainable as well. So yeah, definitely a learning curve, definitely a lot to do. But I think I just really thought it would be a useful pointer from the point of view of looking at the challenge, to highlight the benefits of collaboration, the benefits of working together and partnering to overcome some real difficulties, both from a cost point of view, but also from an obstacle point of view, from a permitting point of view, and the benefits of PIA and this kind of infrastructure sharing is really important for us to think about.
okay, thanks, Catherine. If you could go on mute, that would be very helpful. So a quick question, I guess, for you, Mark. You've talked about lots of different companies ferreting about in your infrastructure and in some cases, I guess, making improvements to your infrastructure. How are you managing the control of that at the centre? It's a fairly complex operation, considering I suspect that some of those decisions are made off the cuff in the field.
Yeah, I mean, we have some very tight rules which are governed and regularly inspected by Ofcom, for example, on how we work. And essentially, a PIA-CP effectively places a reservation that says they're working in an area. In the same way that we use whereabouts, the CPs report their whereabouts, so they basically say we're working in this area. We have our whereabouts that we post, and that's largely it. We've had a couple of instances where we have two teams of engineers both trying to get ladders up the same pole and put equipment on the top of a pole. I mean, straight up, we have. And you know, those things tend to have to get resolved locally, you know, after you or no after you type of thing. So we've got local processes in education, and then there's some central control in terms of everybody puts their reporting in. So and all the PIA CPs can see who's placed a reservation where, but you don't know the names of people who placed reservations there. So they know people are active, but there is a hell of a lot of work going on, you know, and yes, there is overbill by multiple parties. Part of the PIA product, though, is effectively there are a lot of rules. I won't go into all the detail and bore people of it, but about, you know, effectively Openreach has to provide capacity. So if there's no capacity on the poles, Openreach has to provide more capacity on the poles and that sort of thing. So there are a lot of rules. It's still, you know, we are learning. You know, straight up, we are learning. It's not.
Yeah.
This is a new event for a lot of people. And if you're an engineer and you're Openreach that's been building fiber networks for the last 30 years, perhaps building Ethernet, and you haven't seen anybody else, and it's a new experience for that person on that day to find something new, and you know, we're learning.
Okay, so a follow-on question then, Rob. You know, what's the rough split between urban and rural on PIA take-up right now? I mean, Catherine and I build in rural areas, and without wishing to be rude about it, some of the infrastructure out there is in a bit of a sorry state. In urban areas, I suspect it's far more fit for purpose. I mean, where are you finding the highest levels of demand currently?
Are you asking me, Steve? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. There's quite a lot of both going on, if I'm perfectly honest. You know, and maybe that's because some of the there's probably more in the cities, frankly. You know, just because I guess some of the operators are doing a lot of work at a larger scale, but there are probably in CP terms there are a number of CPs specialising in different areas, and you know, it's perhaps not hard to think about. You know, if all the quote big guys are going after the sort of low hanging fruit in the cities, so to speak, there is an opportunity to get good take up in volume if you're serving areas that have poor broadband and don't have multiple infrastructure providers. So I think we're seeing in kilometres of duct and poles used, it's the cities, but in terms of volume of 130 PIA customers, it's probably fairly reasonably spread, to be honest.
And there's a question for you, Catherine, come into the chat. What advice, you know, a couple of key points, would you give to other providers on implementing PIA successfully?
Oh, great question. Thank you. So in terms of advice, I would say, I think the thing to focus on the thing to be aware of is that at the moment, the process is quite admin intensive and it is quite detailed. And that's important for a lot of reasons. And kind of once you start doing it, you start to understand the rationale behind it. So I think the advice is really probably start small and be prepared to learn as you go. You know, don't underestimate, you know, the fact that you know, you need to follow processes and they can seem, you know, quite prescriptive. And so you just need to spend time understanding them, figuring out how it's going to work in your business. The other bit of advice, and I hope, Mark, you know, you understand what I'm saying, is that, you know, don't trust the records. You know, we all know what records are like in our industry. And I think, you know, the other thing that we've learned is it's a great pointer, but at the end of the day, there is absolutely no substitute for boots on the ground right now in almost any kind of this build, whether you're building it, you know, kind of whether you're doing your own excavation or you're using other infrastructure. Get out there, have a look at it. And yeah, just be prepared to, you know, the first few, take it easy, take a little bit of time, just make sure you've got it right. The advice is there, the information is there. It's just about just taking that time to make sure that you're really embedded it and you understand how you're going to use it in your business. Yeah, that would be the advice.
Great, thanks, Catherine, and thanks, Mark. Okay, thanks, Audrey, and now we are back live, and I'd like to introduce our next session and our next panelists. So we're now going to chat through a case study which will explore and examine the benefits of open networking to boost performance. And I'd therefore like to introduce Barry McGinley, who's a technical sales engineer for EPS Global, covering the EMEA region, and Robin Taylor, who's the founder of Zeta Connect. And these two guys are going to have an open debate and an open discussion in front of the whole world to explain to us exactly what the benefits of open networking are. Over to you guys.
Cheers, Steve. Thanks very much. So yeah, the benefits of open networking or disaggregation, as some of the kind of big carriers or telcos are calling it, to boost performance, looking at delivering Gigabit Britain. So I'm Barry, pre-sales engineer, network engineer with EPS. So what I want to do is first have a look at the open networking ecosystem. So this kind of all started around 2009, and Facebook decided they wanted to redesign their entire infrastructure. So they got a team together and they redesigned their switches, their software, their racks, the cooling, everything. And that data center is still going in Primeville, Oregon. But the big thing to come out of it was that they open sourced all of the devices, and then created the OCP. So that's the bottom icon there, the Open Compute Project, along with Intel, Rackspace, and a few other guys. So OCP look after kind of the bare metal hardware and the software, so open source software like Sonic. And the way it works is, say we'll take Facebook for example again. They'll say, right, we want a 10 gig switch with 48 10 gig ports and say 600 gig uplinks. So they'll give that design specification into the OCP, and then hardware vendors like UFI-Space or EdgeCore will go off and build the specific switch to that design specification. And when it's accepted by the OCP, they actually then give all the information back to the OCP so anybody can build it themselves. The next organization is the ONF. That's the Open Networking Foundation, and they started in 2011 as well. So it was primarily to look after OpenFlow, which was the first protocol to separate the control and data plane, and to kind of push the benefits of SDN in general. But then 2016, they kind of changed tack a little bit, and they started a project called CORD, which is Central Office Re-architected as a data center, and started working with some of the big telcos and carriers. The final organization, I suppose, in the ecosystem is TIP, or the Telecom Infra project, and they started in around the same time as the ONF started CORD. So they have projects in access, transport, and core and services, and then there's more projects inside of that again. So they're kind of the community and where all the collaboration happens between all the big tier ones. So the benefits and attributes of open networking, or disaggregation as it's called. So we've open hardware and we've open software goes on top of it. And this is disaggregation, separating the hardware from the software. On the attribute side, we have open hardware, white box, bare metal, and bright box. So bare metal is a switch or a router with nothing on it bar a bootloader called ONI, and that now allows us to install a NOS on top of it. A white box is a bare metal switch which already has the NOS on top of it. So Cumulus did Cumulus Express, IP Infusion are doing IPI Pro. And then finally we've bright box. So just a little bit, so that'd be HP and Dell, but a little background that Acton Group, who own EdgeCore, make the majority of the switches for these guys. So a 10 gig switch that EdgeCore sell, a bare metal switch, is the exact same as what Dell and HP sell, just with a different badge on it. And the same process happens. ONI is the bootloader, they have to install their operating system on top of it. We've open software, so we've open source and commercial software and software controlled infrastructure. So the benefits, so disaggregation provides freedom, so it removes vendor lock-in, and this is one of the most important parts. Greater control over the network, rapid innovation, which is really important as well, because now the hardware guys can go off and build the hardware, do what they do well, and the software guys can go and do what they do well. And obviously software can be provisioned far quicker than the hardware. So we get rapid innovation. Again, reduce Capex and Opex. So there's a bit of a yin and yang to the Capex and Opex, but if you're going bare metal with an operating system sitting on top of it, and you're going to manage that individually, there's obviously huge Capex savings to be had. So disaggregated applications helping Gigabit Britain. There's too many here to go through in any sort of detail. It just gives you an idea of how many devices there actually are now, bare metal devices. So we have, on the access side, we've OLTs, so XGS PON and GPON or any PON. Aggregation switches and routers, virtual BNGs. Tibit is an interesting one. It looks like a transceiver. You stick that in a 10 gig port and you can create your own XGS PON network. So really good for enterprises. You can split that 164 or 128 ways then. We have white box transponders with coherent optics, open road M's. Nice little product here, 400 gig switch. Can go 120 kilometers using 400 gigs ZR optics. Per port, it's about as cheap as you're going to get. On the routing side, cell site routers, which have been really, really successful. I think AT&T are installing 80,000 of them into their network. Standalone routers, aggregation routers, and then distributed chassis routing. I'd love to get into that a little more. It's like, so now we can have thousands of ports basically. So if you take a spine and leaf within a data center, so we use a Qumran 2C or Jericho 2 as the leaf. That's up there, Broadcom switching ASICs. And then above that, we use the Ramon ASIC, which allows us to create the fabric. So now we can scale to thousands of ports basically. And on the data center side, we have the data center side's been going for 10 years, so it's very mature at this stage. We can create fabrics over multiple data centers, huge variety of NOSes now, 400 gig moving to 800 gig, and lots of different products at data center interconnect as well. As I said, I could probably do an hour on each of these individually, so I'm not really doing them any justice. So EPS, I suppose, our role in open networking. So looking in, there's a lot of products, there's a lot of vendors, a lot of software vendors, a lot of hardware vendors. So we kind of sit in the middle of that. We work with all the software vendors and the majority of the hardware vendors. And what we can do is just take some of the hassle out of it. So instead of wondering which NOS to put on or which to trial, we can help you with that. And then when it does come to deployment, we will install the NOS and the licensing onto the box and bundle in interoperable transceivers. So basically, the boxes are ready to slide into a cabinet. So you get all the benefits of open networking without the little hassle parts in the middle, I suppose. Okay, so now I'm going to introduce Robin Taylor. So he's the CEO of Zeta Connect. Hey, Robin.
Hi, Barry. Thank you very much for inviting me on today, and thank you for the ISPA members for having me today, and thank you, Steve, for the introduction. I'll kick off by telling you a bit about Zeta. So I founded Zeta back in 2017 to assist tenants of commercial office space with the seemingly simple task of getting connected, which, with the minefield of way leaves, access issues, all of which have been mentioned by some of the earlier sessions, as well as potential civil delays if your chosen carrier is not in the building, we came up with a solution of a fiber backbone to help landlords and developers make it easier for occupiers to consume that connectivity they want. The best way to liken it is you wouldn't let a floor of an office building with no access to electricity. So why should fiber be any different? And this sort of touches on, should fiber be a utility? The fiber backbone model is, in essence, how connectivity is consumed in the data center, with you ordering service from a provider, and that gets delivered to a meet me room, and you order a cross connect. It's exactly the same model we applied to a commercial office building. We build a fiber backbone, and tenant orders that service, and we cross connect it with up to the tenant's floor without need for way leave. We work with everyone who's selling fiber, from the city fibers and community fibers right through to the Virgins and Verizons of this world, to connect the occupiers of these buildings. And everything we do is open access to ensure that any occupiers of these buildings have full choice. And although we're speaking at an ISPA event, we don't actually claim to be an ISP ourselves. Instead, we invite other ISPs to use our infrastructure to deliver their service. And in fact, we have a rule internally that we do not sell or resell directly to tenants of the building. We allow the ISPs to do that, and we just facilitate it. We've got clients up and down the country, so we make it our business to know who's building what and where. A couple of examples. We've got a project in Bath where the landlord is targeting wired school, and we need to bring another provider into the building to facilitate that. And we've engaged with TrueSpeed to assist with this. Further afield, we're working on a few projects in Glasgow with Commonwealth to do that. And I'll just take this opportunity now. I saw there was a question on the last panel session from Jan regarding sharing of infrastructure and MDUs. And this is exactly what we facilitate with our fiber backbone. We can have multiple ISPs coming into the basement, and we provide a shared infrastructure to deliver that service to the tenants within the buildings.
Okay, great. So I don't know, you touched on what you do there, but the actual project you brought open networking in to try and help with, can you give us a little more information on that?
Sure. So as a sort of natural extension of the fiber backbones being within the building, connecting a sort of carrier meet me area in the basement of the building to the tenants, and the demand for shorter lead times of services from our landlord clients who are providing pre-fitted out space, who want to have Wi-Fi, and they want to have the furniture in, and they want to be able to move tenants in very quickly with that sort of WeWork level of flexibility. We're sort of taking the fiber backbone model and stretching that. Instead of to the meet me room in the basement, we stretch that back to a data center, and we're using a mixture of wavelength services and managed Ethernet to do that. And we're also deploying it as a campus networks on some of the larger developments to be able to offer very low cost, rapidly provisioned layer 2 service. And that's open to any of the ISPs in the data center who wish to cross connect with us, and they can access those tenants within the buildings. Quick example, we deployed open access blown fiber tubing infrastructure around 100 Liverpool Street, central London. We've provided cross connects to 6 different tenants for 30 different circuits from 7 ISPs within the building, and we have our wavelength bearer coming from Volta data center from our new core that we're building as part of this project to facilitate that connectivity. And going forwards, the intention is to allow our platform to act as an NNI exchange to allow cross-connecting of services between smaller, more specialist niche providers who have customers and don't necessarily want to do their own dedicated cross-connect. So as an example, one of our partners, Luminet, who specialized in London-centric fixed wireless connectivity, have NNIs with us, and that allows other ISPs who have NNI with us to access Luminet services as a wholesale product without having to be in the same data center or having their own dedicated cross-connect or Ethernet service to Luminet's POP within the data centers they're in.
Okay, and so you chose an open networking solution. Why did you choose that over your Cisco or Juniper, and what did you actually choose?
So we looked at the big players within the industry, and for bandwidth and port density we're looking for, the barrier to entry of the bigger players was just too high for us to effectively be able to deploy the sort of 10 gig services that we were targeting. We're talking 10 gig dedicated Ethernet. And we really like the fact that we weren't tied to a specific hardware or software vendor. We could chop in and out hardware if there was a particular switch from a vendor that suited our needs. We had a full range of choice. In terms of the solution that we've actually deployed, we've had previous dealings with EdgeCore on their enterprise devices that EPS have been supplying us with, and we're really impressed with the build quality of those switches. And so it was a natural progression for us to look at EdgeCore's white box open networking devices. So in the end, we opted for the AS7712s to provide us with 100 gig ports at a spine level within the data center, and the AS5912s to provide us multiple 10 gig ports. And we were faced with a huge range of choices of operating systems that we could run on those devices, from Picare, Open Network, Linux, etc. And with plenty of guidance from Barry and team, we settled on IP Infusion to run as our NOS of choice. And a big part to play with that was a successful implementation of Links LUN 2, which is a similar topology, running VX, LAN, EVPNs to our use case.
Yeah, like they're deploying in Manchester now as well, the same OCNOS as well. So what stage of deployment are you at, or implementation, or?
So we've got some kit heading to the data center, some kit in the lab ready to go. We've been really pleased with the sort of testing we've done so far and the performance of the kit, especially with the support that we've had from yourself, Barry, EPS, and the wider IP Infusion team in terms of our slightly unique use case for sort of smaller deployment. Couldn't have been more helpful.
There's a question in the chat for you, Robin, which I'll just read out. It's an interesting approach, at least for commercial property. Presumably, any ISP SLAs run to the comms room. You provide support to the customer for the in-building infrastructure. So who pays for the infrastructure and service? Is it the ISP, the landlord, the occupier, or someone else?
So we try and keep the model as simple as possible. The occupier pays a one-off cross-connect charge for us to go in there, cross-connect their service, test it, and the landlord pays us a recurring annual fee to provide an SLA, and we aim to match the service provider's SLA in terms of a break fix of the infrastructure within the building. Okay,
that's great. So, Robin, Barry's been asking you all the questions. Have you got any for him?
I haven't got any specific. Yeah.
Good.
I know Barry's got one more for me.
Right. Okay.
No, just what does the future hold for Zeta? Just interested to know where you see yourselves in 5-10 years time, kind of thing.
Yeah, so we're welcoming more ISPs to join us, both in the DCs and make use of our open access fiber backbones within the building. And ultimately, as a sort of primarily a consultancy business, we aim to be the UK's leading connectivity consultants, as well as maintaining our open accessibility. As with many others in the industry, we're developing a portal, and this will enable our landlord partners to view all of their properties' connectivity capabilities in one place. And in time, we plan to add on-demand provisioning so that our customers and service providers can provision their own services once they got an NNI in place, with sort of minimum fuss and the shortest lead time possible.
Great.
Okay, so we're kind of out of time, guys. It was an interesting debate, good discussion. Barry, Robin, thanks very much. I think Audrey's going to get you guys to step away from the stage now.
I know we've got a poll there, so it'd be very interesting to see anyone's feedback on the poll. So thank you very much.
Yep. Cheers, Steve.
Good stuff. Thanks very much, guys.
Cheers, Robin. Bye.
Cheers. Okay, so I'd now like to kick off our fourth presentation of the day, and this is one I think that's going to be of interest to lots of people because we're going to be talking about the knotty subject of way leaves. I'd like to introduce George Rudak from Trenches Law, who's going to run through a presentation, I think, George, and tell us all how we can simplify our process of securing way leaves.
As Steve said, I'm George at Trenches Law. So we're a law firm specialising in telecoms law, but more particularly way leave. That's the main bulk of the work that we do. I have seen some familiar faces on here, which is nice as well. I think we work with a lot of people on here, so it's good to see you. Audrey, if you can pop onto the next slide, please. So just as a bit of background, obviously, as we're aware that as has been the theme throughout the sessions today, we want to achieve the target of 85% by 2025 of gigabit capability, and the connectivity has never been more important than it is now, as we've come through the dreaded COVID pandemic. And we know that way leaves are a huge issue for a lot of providers. It's been quite the theme today running through the sessions, and I'm sure we all saw the latest report from Infra as well, where way leaves was cited as the #1 issue for altnets. So we want to talk a little bit today about the legislation around way leave, how that's changed this year, how it might change, and the impact if it doesn't. So the Telecommunications Infrastructure Leasehold Property Act is probably the biggest change of this year. I'll also cover off the ECC reform and a little bit about the Queen's speech as well. If you could just pop onto the next slide, please, Audrey. So the Leasehold Property Act recently received royal assent in March, and the aim of the Act is to allow operators to apply to the court under a statutory notice under the code where landowners are refusing to engage, so where they're completely ignorant to request for way leave, which is fantastic in theory, but we just don't think that it goes far enough. As drafted currently, it only applies to MDUs in urban areas, really, to receive any real benefit. So what we want to do here is try and push that further. There is currently a consultation on the Leasehold Property Act through the DCMS. They're inviting responses with a deadline of the 4th of August. The consultation wants to set the terms and the code for implementation of the Act. So they're seeking views on the terms that will accompany the code rights following successful application. But they're also, more importantly, seeking views on how the scope of the Act can be extended. So to apply it to other property types beyond the MDUs that we've discussed in urban areas, so business parks, office blocks, etc. And I think that's really important and really key that as an industry, we're responding to that consultation and giving them evidence as to how important it is that this Act goes further. There are also proposed terms within the consultation that set out how the code rights can be exercised, as well as the rights and responsibilities of landowners. So I would really urge everyone to have a look at that if you haven't already, and look at a response. There was also recently a consultation on the Electronic Communications Code. We did work actually with some of the attendees on here, and we also worked with ISPA to provide responses to that consultation. So the three key areas were issues relating to obtaining and using code agreements, rights to upgrade and share apparatus, and expired agreements, so renewal of code agreements, i.e. way leaves. And there was lots of noise around this consultation, and there were lots of views, and some quite bold responses were offered. Some of which were to say, should we need to get way leaves at all? Can there be a process whereby we can have access without the need for a way leave to some of these buildings? And I think one of the key issues that came out as well was that some clarification or process is required around costs. A lot of the costs that are requested are quite high from freeholders in terms of consideration, but also the professional fees related to the acquisition of the way leave. And believe me, as a solicitor, it infuriates me as much as it infuriates you when the other side are charging extortionate professional fees. So we think that that's quite important, and it will be interesting to see the outcome of the responses to that consultation. We were also really pleased to see that the Queen's speech recently made it quite clear that this area there's a real desire and an intent to legislate, and at the highest level of government and parliament, this is under review. It was just the Product Security and Telecommunications Infrastructure Bill was discussed. So whilst we've not got the exact details of that yet, it does potentially give us a second chance for reform and to try and push some of these changes through, which are vital. Ultimately, if the legislation doesn't go far enough, way leaves are going to continue to be a problem for operators across the board, and it's going to continue to be a barrier to build and to meet this Gigabit Britain target. There are a number of things that are ongoing as well at the minute at government level and across industry. So I think a number of you have been on the DCMS roundtable workshops. They're currently in phase 2, and there was a lot of feedback about phase 1 that it was great to have this discussion and that these discussions should be happening, but there was no real tangible gain from them. So that's what we really want to achieve from the second phase of workshops. And what has been identified is that there really needs to be a clear distinction between mobile and fixed line and urban and rural, because the difficulties that are faced in those 4 areas vary, and the requirements for those 4 areas vary quite a lot as well. So they're the kind of key 4 areas of breakdown that we're looking at trying to improve the way leave processing. So I would urge everybody who is a part of that to actively take part in that as well. There is, of course, a wider impact, not just to potentially missing targets if we don't kind of improve this legislation, but also the impact that this will have to consumers directly. And we've talked a lot around digital divide today. I saw some questions were asked in the first session around digital divide, and also should broadband be viewed as a utility. So Audrey, if you can just get to the next slide for me, please. So we spoke to Nicola Brown, a representative for Women in Social Housing Northwest, and she has said that isolation during the pandemic has been something that's affected many individuals. The crisis has not only magnified the need to stay connected, but also how much more we all need to do in terms of supporting one another and tackling the digital divide. So if you can just skip to the next slide for me, please. The reason that we've highlighted this and why this is really important for us and a key kind of area that we need to address is because we often find, on behalf of our clients and when dealing with WayLeaves directly, that a lot of the processes that housing associations and local authorities are using to acquire WayLeaves are convoluted, they're too long, they take too much time, and they cost too much money. The problem that we're seeing here then is that as operators move on to their next build area, buildings where they've been unable to acquire a WayLeave are left behind. And because of the difficulty with housing associations and local authorities, it oftentimes tends to be that tenants living in social housing are within those buildings that are left behind, and that tenants in private housing where WayLeaves have been able to be negotiated with the freeholder are receiving the services, and we really want to avoid that and avoid the problem in years to come and of that digital divide increasing. So if you can just pop to the next slide again, Audrey. Thank you. And this is why we think that action's needed today. So it's absolutely fantastic that there's a lot of buzz at the minute, and there's a great deal of interest in this area, and we really need to capitalise on that. I did note in the previous session, I think, Steve, you said that you were due a discussion with Matt Warman, and I think one discussion had already been had. And it's key that whilst the appetite is there, we really make the most of that, because if we don't get the changes through as an industry that we need to see in this legislation, there are going to be problems that we encounter in 5-10 years' time when that digital divide has increased and connectivity is even more important, and we've got a number of consumers unable to access it. So if you move to the last slide. Thanks. So I wanted to leave enough time for questions. I didn't want to kind of bowl everyone over with legal jargon, so I've tried to keep it quite high level. But if anyone does have any questions that we don't get round to, perhaps in the chat, if you'd like to give us a call or email me directly, my contact details are on the screen.
Question's quite a simple one. Will this new legislation have any impact on existing WayLeave agreements, e.g. ones whereby you may need additional services into a premises? Will the new legislation take precedence?
So the new legislation really is to complement the code. So where you've got an existing WayLeave agreement, the rights that you benefit from under the code would continue to take effect, and the new legislation complements it. And a lot of the proposals and reforms that are coming in predominantly really relate to the problem with acquiring WayLeaves. So it's more focused currently on the upfront process.
Okay, and the questions are starting to roll in now, George, unsurprisingly, given the importance of the topic. What are your thoughts on the effectiveness of developing Weilu templates to simplify the process for landlords? And how much do you think this will contribute to solving the problem of Weilus?
So it's a really good question, and it's something that we've been discussing in the DCMS workshops, and I know that everyone's keen to try and get Weilu templates, as I've said, in the 4 distinct areas. I think that there definitely should be industry standards around it, and I think that would be effective, and guidance coupled with that to help freeholders understand what Weilu means and why it's important. I don't think that we'll ever get to a point where there's just one template and it's only that template that's agreed, because I think it's still important to balance the rights of freeholders with the need to get into their buildings. So I think there's always going to be some room for negotiations, but to have an industry standard that everybody kind of works around within parameters would be very beneficial.
Okay, thanks, George. And can you elaborate on the specific Weilu challenges for social housing providers and what can be done to alleviate those?
Yes, so I think with social housing providers, a lot of the problems that I see tend to be there's a lot of kind of strict protocols and processes that they understandably have to follow around the way in which that work can be carried out and what they believe the benefit will be to their tenants. But I think there's a misunderstanding in some parts as to how beneficial this really is for their tenants. I think that message really needs to get across. And I think that another problem is that social housing providers may believe that having one network operator in the building, for instance, or already having access to broadband via a copper network, they might believe that that's suitable and they don't understand the benefit of the upgrade. I think for me as well, there is oftentimes a cost implication, particularly with local authorities, and the costs can become quite high per building. They can often ask for benefits in kind in addition to a consideration payment. So they might ask for iPads to be provided and things like that. And it can become very, very convoluted in terms of what they're asking for and the negotiation of the terms themselves.
Okay. And there's one more question, which I think we've just got time to squeeze in. Does the legislation say anything specific about sharing fibre networks within a building between operators? Or is the plan there will be multiple networks within a building, one for each of the fibre network operators?
So what the legislation does say in the Communications Act, there is a section 134 that states that tenants are entitled to choose whichever provider they wish to choose to provide services. So any kind of provision in the lease that prevented that would be void. So a landlord can't kind of make that choice on behalf of the tenant, and they should be allowed to choose a provider. Now, I know that in some cases that can be done on an open network, but where it can and where providers need to bring in their own fibre, landlords shouldn't be preventing that.
Okay. I'm going to cut my closing remarks short so we can squeeze in one more question, George.
Okay.
Do you think operators may have been overly aggressive when the code was first introduced in 2017? And that could have contributed to negative relations between freeholders and landowners, or with freeholders and landowners?
I think that there was understandably a lot of excitement about the new code coming in, and operators were keen to rely on it and to rely on their new rights. But I don't think it's necessarily a case of being overly aggressive. I think that some of these Weilu conversations have gone on for such a long time, and operators really need to be getting into these buildings and getting down these roads, and they've been afforded these rights under the code. And whilst the best possible course of action is always to reach a friendly and amicable solution, I think that we, as an industry and operators, need to be clear of the rights that they've got, and ultimately, without using them and relying on them, we're not going to be able to meet the targets.
Okay. Thanks, George. That's great. I'm now going to make a few closing remarks and just draw out some of the key takeaways that I picked up from this whole event. It's been a fascinating couple of hours. I think that the first key message from me is that as an industry, we've got an awful lot to do in a short time, And I referenced this at the start. Collaboration is going to be key to us succeeding in terms of securing the UK's place at the top of that Gigabit connectivity league table. The whole digital division piece, which I didn't expect to come up as frequently as it did, I mean, that's clearly a real problem and needs to be addressed through appropriate legislation, but also through the efforts of us in the industry. Cash is not a challenge. There's a lot of money out there being thrown at this sector to expedite the build. And normally you would think the cash would allow us to go faster as builder operators. But actually, we probably need better regulations, including improved ways to expedite the build. So although the cash gives us the oil to go faster, the other bits of the engine need some work on them as well in order to allow us to do that. And overbuild will definitely happen. I mean, that came out strongly in the City Fibre presentation. But where that increases access and potentially closes that digital divide, and where it creates healthy competition, that's probably not a bad thing. In fact, I would say it's a good thing. In closing, I'd just like to thank all of the speakers who've joined us on this platform today. I apologise that it's not been the best platform. We've had some sound issues, we've had some camera issues, but somehow we managed to fumble our way through it. So thanks to all of the speakers for their patience with the platform and for finding a way through that those issues that we had earlier. And also thanks to all of our ISPA partners, and thanks to the ISPA board and council for inviting me to chair this event. And with that, I'd like to hand over to Audrey to talk to us about our next event.
Thank you very much, Steve. Thank you so much for sharing the event. And yes, I invite all of you to the next webinar of the ISP Business Model Series in October. Stay tuned for the date and theme. In the meantime, we have another ISPA event on the 7th of July at 2 p.m. So we've put the link for you to register in the chat. And of course, we'll have our ISPA award ceremony on the 4th of November, but you will be communicated everything on time. So thank you so much. And you have a few more minutes if you want to browse the expo area or network with other members. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.